In our effort to bring you up to speed on wet flies, we had Davey Watton go over a display of patterns, some historical and some more modern. In the process, he gives a little history on how they were developed and used.
And that, to a large extent, is the hallmark of what wet fly fishing is all about. You may be fishing the technique the right way, but you're not fishing the correct flies. Reason being, the prevailing conditions, the overhead light conditions, the relative angle of the sun to the horizon where you fish those flies, the relative position you fish those flies, whether they be upstream, across stream or downstream, all those factors have to be taken into consideration for your choice of fly and your presentation thereafter, how you fish those particular flies. This fly here is again more of a modern variant from an existing traditional. Now and again someone will decide, well, I really need to kind of make something that maybe gives that fly an extra bit of trigger factor so far as the fish's eye is concerned, and typically that would be something that you might see. We can kind of look at a few of these flies a little bit closer. There are flies here that have got their originations from Ireland. There are some that have their originations from Scotland, some more so in the North Country of the United Kingdom, known as Yorkshire, and some of them of Welsh origin. To a large extent, a lot of those flies can be recognised to some extent, or the origins of them, by the nature of the materials and the tines and or dressings, as we call them, of those particular flies. This particular fly here is called the Alexander. One of my all-time personal favourites, in fact, was the first fly I ever caught a trout on, and that fly I'll never forget. It's a classic wet fly. It is as good today as it ever was when it was first innovated. It'll work on streams, creeks, rivers, lakes, wherever trout have it. That's a classic fly to use. Moving over to here, this fly is the Wickham's Fancy. We used this fly to great success in our filming this last few days on the White River system. It's a great fly to use in bright light conditions. It exhibits a lot of attractiveness to it. Works great in hatches of caddis and other food forms that are seen up or near the surface, particularly in those conditions. Typically here is a fly of Irish origin. These are typically used as top dropper flies, i.e. that is the fly that's fished near to and or on the surface as the flies are recovered back to the angler. A great brown trout fly, it really is. Then we have flies here that have got a more of a Scottish origination. This fly here is the Peter Ross. Again, it's a fly that's caught me a great number of fish in my lifetime, both trout, salmon, sea trout, and many other salmonid species. Next to this is the fly called the Kingfisher Butcher. I mean, it is essentially an attractive fly. There really is nothing in nature that resembles it, at least in our eyes, so to speak. But of course, it's got elements of fish colors, particularly rainbows. They very much like these color orientations of gold, orange, and blue. However, the origination of that fly was essentially, of course, for fishing for brown trout and sea trout. This here is a typical fly of Welsh origin. As you can see, it's kind of a drab fly, subdued, dull colors, and that's very much typical of the kind of flies that were innovated in Wales 300, 400, 500, 600 years ago. All of the streams and rivers and lakes in Wales mostly contained brown trout and Atlantic salmon when they chose to come into those systems, and sea trout. That fly there, typically is a classic fly to use at the times when caddis are emerging, and also it's a good fly to represent various terrestrials that get blown onto the surface of the water, beetles and spiders and stuff like that. Moving down a little bit further, this is more of a typical modern innovation. It's kind of a fly by definition known as the traditional fly. It's fished generally in the traditional style where 2 or 3 or 4 flies may be fished on the cast and fished in the prescribed manner to attract attention from fish. As you can see, it's got a little small deer hair or muddler head. It's got some legs that are tied from knotted cock pheasant centertail, and it's got a hare's ear body. It's just one of those flies. It's just got a lot of the intrinsic values of a fly that you would want to induce a fish to take it. Contrary to that, this here is most definitely a much more modern variant. This is a little small mini muddler, deer hair head, orange squirrel tail wing, and body either gold or silver tinsel. Small muddlers can be devastatingly deadly at times, particularly when they're fished on or near the surface. It kind of bulges the water real well and adds a tremendous amount of attractiveness to the effectiveness of such flies when they're fished. That fly right there is called a whiskey fly. kind of ironical, I guess, given the fact that it's got its origins over there in Scotland. This here is a fly called a Zulu. How it come to be given that name, I really haven't established, and I've tried to find that reasoning out. However, it's got a red wool tail, it's got a black seal for a body. Without a doubt, these guys here are some of my personal favorites. These are typically the Clyde style flies. We fished those successfully too in the last couple of days fishing. Very, very sparsely tied. Maybe 1.5 tons of soft hackle, a little tiny wing, usually formed from starling. The body is represented by about 1/2 and slightly less of the overall shank length of that hook. As we've already discussed, ideally the fish's view is centered on the actual tied fly, so as opposed to the hook that it's tied on, which allows you to use a small fly on a larger hook, so increasing, of course, your hooking potential. This fly here also is one of my all-time favorites. It's a fly called an Invicta. Contains a lot of fishy elements, just the general attractiveness of the fly. And that's often the case with a lot of these traditional flies. At the time of origination and use, most of those flies were confined to being used on specific water systems. Once anglers from around the world got to meet each other and started exchanging their views, their opinions about fishing, and almost certainly they would start changing and swapping flies, then of course the flies themselves gradually made their way around to all parts of the world, and of course become somewhat more established and used, although to a large extent where traditional fly fishing is concerned, and certainly a lot of the traditional flies are concerned, unfortunately a lot of that art has to some extent, I wouldn't say totally been lost, but more forgotten. And really, I think that we need to kind of put that a little bit more to the forefront and give fly fishermen today another axe in their armory, so to speak.